Well, hello there. The book world has been really messy lately, and today we'll be diving into major controversies that have shook up the bookish community. From disturbing criminal charges being filed against an author, tone deaf writing choices, and some misguided discussions about DEI and book banning. So let's get into it. Now, this video will be broken down into 3 sections. I'm going to be talking about 3 authors who've recently been authors behaving badly. There'll be a mix of more serious topics and publishing drama, but then there'll also be just some tea and maybe my own opinions. So yeah, let's get into our first author, Sophie Lark. Now, if you're not familiar, Sophie Lark is a New York Times bestselling author. Famous books or famous series is Brutal Prince and Sinner's Duet. And if you see me over here, I'm just looking at my notes. Lark primarily writes romance and dark romance. She has penned more than 24 books, both self-published and with Bloom Books, which is a very popular romance book publishing group, which is an imprint of the U.S. publisher Sourcebooks. So recently, I think it was ARCs or the actual book came out and readers were starting to get the book and of course read it. Because again, she's a very popular author within the bookish space. And when people were reading the book and going through it, the book is called Sparrow and Vine. And recently on social media, some quotes from the book a lot of readers were pointing out some troubling quotes that were in this book that kind of made it seem like the book was either MAGA coded or definitely tone deaf, especially with the current times that we're in with the current president and what's happening. Definitely stuff with immigration. And so the main male character who's supposed to be this morally gray guy who figures out how to not be a jerk, I guess. I don't know. I haven't read the book. He says, quote, "But shouldn't there be a crew of people with questionable work visas picking these grapes for us?" And then another line in the book that upset readers was, "I was inspired by Elon Musk. I use his 5-step design process," which currently, if you haven't been paying attention, Elon Musk is definitely not someone that people would like to be even mentioned in their romance novels. So that has been kind of the controversy so far with Sophie Lark. That has been the current controversy with Sophie Lark. And so after readers pointed out these quotes, the book was then pulled and is now being re-edited. Now, in Sophie Lark's statement, which I'm going to read, she does state that Bloom Books did tell her a couple of times, or maybe one or two times, to take that particular 2 lines out of the book. But she, as an author, decided not to because she thought that it was integral to her story. And then after that, people started going back into Sophie Lark's other books to see if there's any other problematic material.
And then, in my opinion, what I think is the wildest thing that she has put in a book is from her book Bloody Heart, which is a Black woman, white man romance. She has this quote in the book: "He can be my master and I'll be his slave if that's what it takes to get him back." And then, as you can see in the review, it also says that he whips her, which, you are a white woman married to a white man. You have absolutely no place to be writing anything like this.
I do know with this book, to play devil's advocate, I don't think the devil really needs an advocate, but to play devil's advocate, this book in particular plays with the more of a kink. But I do think that as a white woman, as Sophie Lark is a white woman, I do think that you need to be cautious and understanding about certain language. And when you're writing characters of color, I do think that you need to make sure that you are really thinking about the types of language and the types of play that you are writing for this particular character. I understand that it's supposed to be about kink and dom and sub and all of those things, but I do think that you need to be cautious when it comes to language like that, at least coming from a white woman author. So Sophie Lark released a statement. and I'm going to read it. She released this statement on Instagram, on her Instagram stories, and I don't know if it's still there. I've heard some rumors that she took it down, but here's what it says. I want to start by saying how much I appreciate this community. Your passion, support, and willingness to engage in meaningful conversations have always meant the world to me. That's why it's so important for me to address something got wrong. It has been brought to my attention that certain lines in Sparrow and Vine were hurtful. Reading your messages and hearing your perspectives over the past 24 hours has been humbling. And I want to acknowledge the pain my words have caused. I am truly sorry. My intention was to craft and demonstrate a flawed main character, but instead I wrote dialogue that read as attacking a community that I care about very much. During the editing process, Bloom recommended removing these lines, and I made the wrong choice in keeping them. I now understand that impact matters more than intent, and I regret that my words caused harm. Please don't blame Bloom for my mistakes. I wrote this back in the summer of 2024, and a lot has changed in the world since then, particularly in regard to the fate of immigrants worldwide and certain public figures. Some things I would write differently now, so that's exactly what I'm going to do. Words mean nothing without action, so I am pausing this book and this series for some rewrites to ensure that my work doesn't contribute to harm. I will also be listening more closely to our sensitivity readers and taking additional steps to educate myself on responsible storytelling. And to those who took the time to share their feedback, thank you. To those I have hurt, I am very sorry. I hope I can earn your trust back in the future. How I feel about this is, granted, I've never read Sophie Lark's books. I just know she's a very popular author in the BookTok and Bookish space. I do think that the fact that Bloom Books and the fact that you've had sensitivity readers who probably also brought this up, what's the point of having those sensitivity readers? What's the point of like having people read over your book who it's their job to not get you in these types of controversies? What's the point of ignoring them? Now, I understand that with this particular character, he was supposed to be this morally gray guy that eventually, learns not to be an asshole. I don't know. But I do think that in today's day and age, certain political views, as well as certain statements, just, it feels unredeemable, if that makes sense. I think that Sophie Lark is one of those authors that is really beloved, and I think this is really sucks for her. But I think it's a lesson that she needed to learn. The point of having sensitivity readers, the point of having Bloom Books, come in and help you with your books and publishing is not just because they're there to strip away your ideas or to make your books worse. They're there to make sure you don't get in controversies like this. There's a difference between a character being morally gray and them having very racist ideology. We kind of went through the same thing with Tilly Cole, if you don't know about that story. We don't need characters that are morally gray that actually could potentially have harmful views to an entire community. Those aren't morally gray characters. They're racist assholes. That was the first controversy, but it only gets a little bit darker with the next one. So, with our next topic, we will be talking about Lauren Tesolin-Mastrosa. I butchered that. Also known as Tori Woods. Now, this next topic, like I said, will be a little bit darker than the previous. I want to give a trigger warning. This topic covers child sexual abuse materials, also known as CSAM. This section discusses sensitive content that may be distressing. If you find this topic triggering, I encourage you to skip this section and come back to the next author we'll be talking about, which will be a little bit lighter than this one. But like I said, this topic covers CSAM. So if this is triggering to you, definitely move on to the next author. Take care of yourself. So Lauren is a Sydney-based author known for erotic fiction. And she's not a huge author. She has about, this is going to be her third book. The other two aren't as big or popular, but she's just, a independent author trying to make it, Again, she's just a woman in the bookish space, right? And recently, there was a controversy with her book called Daddy's Little Toy. Ew. Anyway, the book's listing describes it as a loose retelling of Cinderella. It faced fierce backlash, as reviewers said the plot focused on the romantic relationship between a male character, a grown male character who is the best friend of the female main character's father. But it also notes that this man started to fall in love with her when she was 3 years old. Like, he was a grown man, friends with her father, and he fell in love with her when she was 3 years old. Now, the book states that they get together when she's barely 18. All of that is gross. Now, Lauren did issue a statement after major social media backlash of the book. She took to her Instagram before her Instagram was taken down. I've checked. She said, "I think there's been a huge misunderstanding. DLT is definitely not promoting or inciting anything ever to do with CSAM, or what is being said is grossly disturbing and breaks my heart as well as makes me sick." Georgia Slove, the book's cover designer, which I think that was another layer of like ew about this book, was the cover was a picture of child blocks, you know, those child blocks that you play with that have the letters on them. Like, that was how the book like was spelled out, like the name of the book. I think that's added on another layer of ew, because it's not like two consenting adults who, I don't even know, it just added on another layer of ew. Georgia Stove, who designed the cover, said, "I have cut ties with Tori Woods effective immediately. All I had known about the book was the blurb, which read barely legal. And in my mind, I truly thought that was okay. Please stop with the threats over something I had no say in." Which I do think that sending death threats over a woman who didn't write the book, you know, is a little much. But with the blurb on like, I looked all over trying to find the blurb on the back, and I don't know. I just think if I'm doing a book cover for a book that says someone is barely legal dating a grown man, I think I would do my research in today's. You need something? Huh? Oh yeah. Love you. So I would maybe, do some research on that, especially in today's climate where you have to look into what the hell barely legal is. She was recently arrested and charged with possessing, disseminating, and producing child abuse material. Like, this is the book. The book itself got her arrested, and the material within the book got her arrested. She was granted conditional bail and is set to appear in court.
The book has been pulled from Amazon and Goodreads already after early reviewers called out the problematic content. Additionally, the author had a previous full-time job working as a market executive at a Christian organization that was specifically in assisted living, I think, in Australia. The author has since been released on bail, and there is a court date for March 31st.
So that'll be interesting to see what happens next with that. And with this story, I think it's sad because this book was kind of labeled under dark romance, or a book that's like taboo romance, more like taboo romance. And I do think that taboo romance a lot of the time gets a bad rep for its tabooness. Think of books like Credence or Birthday Girl, right? A lot of those books that, yeah, these characters are probably 18, 19 years old and with men that are much older. But I think that the added layer of the male character falling in love or lusting after or whatever with this girl when she was 3 years old. Like, how do you fall in love with a 3-year-old, like the it's just kind of giving a little bit of Twilight Jacob vibes, but imprinting that whole thing. Either way, that was weird too. Like, that was weird as well. And with this, I loved how the community, especially people who read taboo romance, especially people who read dark romance and these books that a lot of time get a lot of blowback and a lot of criticism, I like that they all came together and said, like, this is not okay. And I understand authors wanting to push the boundaries or push, the scope of what taboo is, or wanting to maybe normalize certain things, but with these books where characters are barely 18 or falling in love with them before they're 18, they don't quite understand that there has been time and time again studies and work out there that has said that those types of relationships are actually very harmful to the younger person. Everything about this book just feels gross. I mean, even down to the disgusting childlike cover of the book. And I don't even, like, there's nothing, even though I haven't even read it and I don't want to read it, I'm just confused on how she thought that this was going to go. Like, you explicitly state that he falls in love with her when she's 3 years old, as in he watched her throughout her very young childhood, knowing that he was in love with her, and then waited till she was 18 to finally act upon it. It's gross. It's gross. And that's not taboo. That's just disgusting. And I don't know what's going to happen in this court case. I'm happy that, they're looking into it. I'm interested to see what happens, and I'll definitely be keeping up with this story. It's dark situations like this. Young girls being preyed upon by older men. I'm just confused on why she thought people would even be okay with reading this book. I don't know. This one's just dark. That's the end of that chapter of authors behaving badly. Let's move on to one that's lighter. No, not really all that lighter. It's maybe a little more political, but it's one that I wanted to discuss because seeing this woman's videos have been very frustrating, and I want to talk. Next up on the authors behaving badly is author Stephanie Philipps. Stephanie Gibbs is a author who I found out about through TikTok. She's again like an independent author, so her books are self-published, and I think they're in the thriller or like dark romance category. Now, this section is not about her books. In fact, I know nothing about her books, and to be honest with you, at this point, I don't really care about her books. She claims that DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, kept her books from finding a publisher.
Now that Trump thankfully has removed DEI from the workplace, I'm wondering if this will stand in the literary world. So, agents, are you still requiring or having on your wish list that we be underrepresented, we be in the Black community, the LGBTQIA+ community? Because I can't tell you how frustrating it was last year when I was querying agents for my 2-book thriller series, and it was either required because they were only open to submissions for those community, or it was on the wish list. It was put above anybody else. So if you were not underrepresented, you were not in the Black community, you were not in the LGBTQIA+ community, then you would be looked at last. So it was discrimination. Because it was discrimination, I didn't want to be part of it. So I'm just wondering, are we still doing that in the literary world? Or do other authors finally get a chance now to be represented by a literary agent to get a book deal?
And that she's happy that Trump got rid of DEI because finally we can put talent over your sexual orientation or your race. Which essentially is her subtly trying to say publishers were only taking on Black and brown BIPOC individuals and LGBTQ people over people like her, who is a white woman. She's happy that that's gone away because I guess she had experiences, which again, another author also said that she's had this issue where publishers who also kind of had that same complaint, but she said it a couple of, like maybe a year ago, about how publishers nowadays, only care about diversity. And if you're not Black or LGBTQ or non-binary or any of these other signifiers, then they don't want to take on your book. Which, not to call it out, but that's bullshit. DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think a lot of conservatives kind of think that DEI is like the same as like affirmative action. They think that it is a world where white people are being, and not to get political, if you don't like politics, so you might not like this section, but this idea that because companies and organizations have DEI, that means that they're only hiring people who hold marginalized identities, which is not true. It just means that they're opening up their net wide enough to where everyone can be considered, whether you have a disability, whether you are Black. It just means it's opening up the net so that people who are qualified can at least know about the position. People who live in underserved communities can know about the position, right? It's not just going to be people who, my cousin's cousin, because I know them, they can get the position. It opens it up to everyone. And that's essentially what DEI does. And in particular, what's the most funny about her video is the fact that she's a white woman. And white women benefit the most from a lot of the diversity and inclusion. They benefit the most from DEI. When you look at the New York Times bestseller list, right? When you look at books in Barnes & Noble, when you look at the romance section or the dark romance section or the thriller section, what mostly do you see? I took the time to look at the New York Times bestseller list currently in romance, and I think Stephanie would find herself in company with many other white women. And if you look at, people who've gotten multi-book deals, people who've gotten movie deals, people who've gotten selling out book tours, a lot of them are white women, like Colleen Hoover or Emily Henry or Frida McFadden or H.D. Carlton. These are all white women who have had success in the publishing industry. And in fact, someone like H.D. Carlton is an independent author who has had major success with her book to the point that it's now in Barnes & Noble stores without her being a part of a publisher. And the reason why is because her books are good. Well, because I think they're good. I think what I hate the most about her video is this sort of idea that she's been a victim to mean publishing industry that has pushed people like her to the side, which is completely not true. I mean, we saw recently even with books from popular authors who are part of popular publishing, recently having to deal with their books not even really being promoted within Barnes & Noble, or their books being pushed to the back section, or their books not even having as much press as books like Fourth Wing or Onyx Storm or whatever the heck the book is. And that's the part that I think is frustrating about her whole video. There's so many examples of successful white women within the publishing industry that she could look to see that her statement is completely wrong. And I'm not going to sit here and do the cheap shot of like, maybe you're just a shitty writer. I'm not going to do that because that's cheap, right? But what I will say is that her struggles is a struggle that a lot of authors feel. But what they have to do is continue to promote, continue to write, and continue to do the very thing that they claim to love to do. I mean, what she claims to love to do. And hope that it finds the right audience and hopes that it finds the right publisher. That's essentially what all authors have to deal with. I mean, you look back to Sophie Lark, she published a dozen books before she even got with Bloom Books. You have to continue to write and find that audience, but to blame Black people or LGBTQ people on why publishers are looking over you is not taking accountability for the fact that maybe you need to go back to the drawing board when it comes to your books. It's unfair, it's misdirected, and it's wrong. And that has nothing to do with politics. Another one of her videos that pissed me off was her misunderstanding the idea of book banning.
Why are you saying that Trump is banning books in America when really the only books that are being banned, it's just happening at school libraries, and it's because there's graphic murder and smut in the books? Do you want kids to read this? I am genuinely curious. Because I was a teacher and I had my debut novel displayed in my classroom, but it was not part of the curriculum and it was not there for kids to read, and the kids knew that. I was out one day and I had a sub and one of the kids picked it up and read it, and there was another teacher that said something to the principal. The principal grabbed the book, read several chapters, and decided to have me sign a paper banning my book completely from the school. They wouldn't want this to be like at the school. I mean, I just wanted it displayed and I was really proud of it, but I don't want this book or my second book to be in the school library at any school because it's not appropriate for kids. So I'm just curious, as an author and a reader, why do you want kids to read this stuff? Why are you so upset that books like mine and books like that are being banned in school libraries. Why are you upset that kids can't read that stuff?
Now, book banning has been, again, a very hot button topic within the bookish space. And in particular, with book banning, yes, it's a lot of books being banned in school libraries. And I think that what she doesn't quite understand is book banning, and in particular, the books that they are banning, or ones that have been banned multiple times, aren't just books that are explicitly about sex or books that have gory violence. They're books that a lot of time that are written by LGBTQ people or Black people or people part of marginalized communities. And that is something that she completely misunderstands and misrepresents. Books that have been banned, at least in the United States, across multiple different school districts or multiple different libraries, have been The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, The Color Purple by Alice Walker, Gender Queer by Mia Kobebe. Hopefully I didn't butcher that, I'm so sorry. Which was, and like I said, I'm looking at my notes, banned for sexual explicit material and LGBTQ plus content. The Hunger Games is also a banned book, which is a series by Suzanne Collins, and it was banned for violence and anti-government themes and social critiques. Another book that has been banned is The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. Banned for the author's reflections on her sexuality and body. And of course, I wouldn't want my little sister to be reading Haunting Adeline or the Twisted series, right? But I do think that some books, but I also think that we have this very buttoned up to the top idea when it comes to, we have this very I don't want to say prudish, but this very conservative, without the political one, but conservative view about children and healthy discussions of sexuality and sex. We have this idea that if we just don't talk about it or don't put it in material or completely shield it away, that they'll that they'll be pure forever, which isn't true, because they're going to grow into adults, they're going to go to college, they're going to experience life, right? And so I think that books that talk about sex are books that introduce sex within a story, or books that have, a person talking about their sexuality or their body isn't a bad thing as long as it is age appropriate. Now, what do I mean by age appropriate? Introducing it in a way that is healthy, introducing it into the way that is safe, introducing it in a way that is not making it seem like children or teenagers, in particular teenagers, aren't having these discussions already. And so, no, I don't think those types of books that talk about sex should be in schools with people in elementary school and under, right? That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that if you don't have the discussion about sex or sexuality or gender, if you aren't having those discussions with your child is finding it in their ways. And a lot of these books aren't talking about, they're not, talking about people whipping it out and doing things, whatever. A lot of the time they're talking about their sexuality, their body, their new experiences, things that are relatable to that particular age group. I wish I could have a better statement on that, but that's just the way that I feel. And then when it comes to books like The Hunger Games, I think you see just as much violent things as you see on the news. In a world where there's famous people like fucking Andrew Tate, a world where, your child can literally go on the internet and find anything. These types of books being banned, to me, just feels like a waste of time. Feels like a waste of time, a waste of energy, and all it's really doing is silencing voices that don't align with our current administration's political agenda, and a political agenda that is striving to be more understanding, more empathetic, open to talking about sexuality. That's what these banned books, that's the problem, right? And of course you've got other banned books like ACOTAR, and that series has been banned, but that makes sense, right? But to put ACOTAR in the same vein as books like The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank, come on now. I think clearly you are pushing some sort of BS agenda. And so I think her video, this very misguided idea about book banning and why people are so against it, because it's silencing ideas. It's people who think that if their child won't read about LGBTQ characters, then they won't be gay, which is so stupid, so incredibly stupid. right? Like, a book and a movie can influence someone to be gay. A child being around a transgender person will not be transgender when they grow up. Like, that's just not how gender and sexuality and expression, that's not how that works, right? And so I think that's the most frustrating is her view. And I think a lot of conservatives have this view that they are just banning books that talk about, explicit sex, and they're just banning books that just are very harmful to your children, when I don't think the Hunger Games series is harmful to your child. I don't think The Color Purple is harmful to your child. As a person who's read these books, watched the movies, interacted with this content, I will say that the most of those movies or these books have made me do is think about the world, think about my identity, think about my race, think about who I am, and think about the government in different ways. Parallels in relations to what's happening in the United States compared to what's happening around the world. It has made me contextualize it in a way that it's stories and books like this have maybe contextualized the world, contextualized myself. And I think that's what book banning takes away. Tell children who grow up in a certain environment that is how the world works. You don't show them any other outside views or any other outside experiences, and then they grow up with this idea that is very narrow-minded and small. That is the problem with book banning. I wouldn't want to live in a world where I don't get to read about the experiences of people who look different from me or people who are different from me. I wouldn't want to live in that type of world. Apparently she does. Now that we've gotten through those three authors and the current controversy that's happening in the bookish space, I want to know your thoughts. These three controversies may all be different, but I do feel like they show kind of the messy parts of the industry, or really the messy parts of romance or dark romance community. What do you think? Should publishers be more involved with editing certain authors' books? Are authors responsible for how they present their work? Let's talk in the comments. This is a part of an ongoing series of just talking about recent controversies within the bookish space that I feel like talking about. I feel like every single 3 to 6 months there is another author's behaving badly, so I'm pretty sure I will have more to talk about. These are just things that have been on my mind. Oh, and like and subscribe. I'll be here with more bookish content. Yeah.